Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's an honor to be here on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation and the Ta'an-Quachin Council. Today, I'm happy to provide an update on where we are on our path forward plan for lifting COVID-19 restrictions. As we announced at the end of May, we are on track to begin Phase 2 on July 1st. This will introduce a large number of changes to the territory. Residents of British Columbia and Yukon will be allowed to travel back and forth without the need to self-isolate for 14 days. British Columbia residents entering Yukon will be asked to provide documentation of their BC residence at the border or at the airport, such as a driver's license or other documentation. Additionally, residents of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut will also be allowed to enter the Yukon without the need to self-isolate for 14 days. Provided that they travel directly to Yukon from one of the territories or through British Columbia. We appreciate that travel from Nunavut would involve a stop, and as long as the travelers are still within Northwest Territories or British Columbia, that would be acceptable. We are excited to once again welcome residents of British Columbia and our fellow territories to visit Yukon. We are in a good position to be able to lift these restrictions because of the hard work of Yukoners who have diligently practiced the 6 steps for staying safe. As we transition to Phase 2, we must all remain diligent in these safe practices. We are in a good position here in the Yukon, and we have a role to play, each and every one of us, in staying in a good position when it comes to COVID-19. Please continue to practice the 6 steps for staying safe, staying 2 meters apart, and please be patient and respectful of others who are doing their best to stay safe and healthy. Phase 2 will also see other restrictions lifted. Restaurants will no longer be limited to 50% capacity and can increase capacity while maintaining their proper physical distancing requirements. We recognize that COVID-19 has presented challenges to Yukon's restaurants, and we are happy that we will be able to serve more Yukoners and visitors in the coming weeks. Updated guidelines for restaurants will be released prior to July 1st to help restaurants understand how to increase capacity in a safe manner. The Yukon Liquor Corporation has been working with licensees to provide more flexibility around patio space and hours of operation to support local restaurants. Our government is also working with the City of Whitehorse to support restaurants to expand into streets to allow for additional capacity. It has been great to see restaurants adapting to our new reality and finding creative ways of providing Yukoners with delicious foods, including online apps, takeout, take-home meal kits, and the new establishments have even there's been new establishments that have even emerged in the last few weeks to provide additional options. Today is Wednesday, and that is Canada Takeout Day. I encourage Yukoners to support local restaurants by ordering takeout today, but also taking the time to an opportunity to dine in when you have the chance to do so. Bring your whole family. Tomorrow, there will be another fireweed community market in Shipyards Park. I encourage you to support the local food providers that are selling homegrown Yukon foods there as well. Yukon businesses have faced unprecedented challenges over the past few months, and every opportunity to support them counts and shows that they are valuable members of our vibrant community. As of July 1st, outdoor gatherings, social gatherings of up to 50 people will also be allowed as long as they are properly physically distancing. I know that this is welcome news for many Yukoners now that the summer has officially arrived. Getting out on the land to enjoy our beautiful mountains, rivers, and lakes is a fantastic way to stay active, to promote mental wellness, disconnect from our increasingly electronic-based lives as well. Doing it with family and friends is part of what makes Yukon summers so special. I encourage everyone to get outside and to enjoy our beautiful part of the world, and please do it safely. As we move forward on our plans to lift restrictions here at home, with other Canadian provinces, we will be carefully monitoring how to do that safely. I anticipate that we will be able to further lift restrictions in the coming weeks. We are working to allow people from Canadian jurisdictions as early as July 15th, with a 2-week self-isolation requirement in place. As we identified in the Path Forward plan, the time between phases is expected to be about 2 to 4 weeks minimum. This time is used to evaluate the impacts of each step that we do take and to communicate with our partners in this process. As we have been doing, we will continue to speak with Yukon First Nations chiefs, with community mayors as well, and councillors about this change and about other changes as they come. I know that there are Yukoners who would like this process to go faster, and there are also Yukoners out there that want this progress to go slower. There are good reasons on all sides of the conversation, but we must continue to move forward with caution. We will continue to base our decisions on the recommendations of the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the public health community and public health science. Since we began this process, we have kept the health and safety of Yukoners at the forefront, and we will not waver from this commitment. I want to thank you for the time today. Please remain vigilant on your practicing of the Safe 6. Cough and sneeze into your elbow or into a tissue. Stay 2 meters apart from those who are not in your household bubble. Be respectful when traveling. Stay at home if you're not well. Self-isolate if you're required. And most importantly, wash your hands. I know it can be difficult, and we all from time to time can get a bit careless here and there, but we must not let our guard down. These 6 steps apply to all of us, and these 6 steps is what really is keeping us safe. If we all follow these steps, we can greatly reduce our own risk and also the risk to others. Thank you very much. Masi Cho, Ganaschish, Chonitan. Dr. Hanley.
Thank you, Premier Silver. And good afternoon, bon après-midi, et bonne fête de Saint-Jean. This is the season of summer festivals and celebrations. And today in French-speaking communities across the nation, Francophones are celebrating Saint Jean-Baptiste. And in just another week, we will celebrate Canada Day. Here in Yukon, Canada Day signals the opening of our border to our neighbours from BC. As we talked about last week, BC continues to do well, and we are on track for the opening, which means that BC and Yukon residents can travel between the 2 jurisdictions without mandatory self-isolation. In addition, our borders are opening to NWT and Nunavut. As long as travel is direct, we will not require individuals arriving from either of the 2 territories to self-isolate, nor will returning Yukon residents be required to self-isolate. With Phase 2 beginning on July 1st, as the Premier mentioned, it's also the day that restaurants can open up to 100% capacity as long as spacing requirements can be met. Dentists will be able to provide full service to patients. Outdoor gatherings with spacing can increase to 50 people. Also on the reopening list is the reopening of swimming pools and the addition of non-food items and buskers back to the farmers market in Whitehorse. So we tread carefully towards that new normal where our lives will mingle with COVID risk. Life is moving towards some semblance of normalcy, but that normalcy does not mean that COVID-19 is going away. The new reality is that we are to behave differently in order to keep ourselves and others safe from the spread of COVID-19. In other words, our summer honeymoon is over, and the true test of a durable and successful marriage has begun. It's been easy to flirt with COVID danger in the past few weeks when the risk has been so low. But as we open ourselves up to a higher exposure risk, this is time to get serious and committed. As I've said before, the risk to Yukoners is low. At this point, even looking into July, it is very low. But this is a calculated risk nonetheless, as we move in that continuum away from enforcement to individual and collective responsibility. There's a cost to every decision we make. There are definitely costs to staying too restricted for too long. We are learning about those costs more and more. This is not a simple matter of COVID versus normal life with closed borders. There is no normal life with closed borders. The effects are enormous and the risks are real. But opening up also has its price. That price is being vigilant with observing spacing and the Safe 6 measures. From what I've seen and heard, this has not always been the case of late. I have heard of crowded bars and restaurants, of social gatherings that are too close or over the limit. This must stop, and enforcement of non-compliance with direction will happen. Opening our border to BC will bring some relief. Families will have a chance to visit. Yukoners anxious to get out and connect with friends and family will have a chance to do that. Formal or informal supply lines will be easier to maintain. This BC bubble is an opportunity for us to see how well we do when we move away from enforcement at the borders to a controlled entry that will rely on voluntary compliance. The need for compliance comes from all of us. Keep in mind, visitors or returning travelers from BC do not just get waved through. They will have a written declaration and a commitment to fulfill at the border. We know that for many reasons we cannot keep Yukon cocooned from the rest of the country until a vaccine is found. In return, we should accept that we will see more cases of COVID-19 in Yukon. What's important here is to make sure that all our vulnerable sites and people are protected. We're doing all we can to protect a case from becoming an outbreak, to prevent a small outbreak from becoming a large one, to keep ahead of community spread with rapid case identification and isolation of contacts. I'm confident that we can address the next cases in the same manner of prompt containment and care for the patients that we demonstrated for the first 11 cases. The way forward is going to be a cooperative adventure between the public, governments, and public health. So what is your part in this adventure, and what can we commit to? In addition to the Safe 6 and following all the guidance we have produced, this is where referring to the 3 Cs and the 3 Ts can help. I've talked about the importance of the 3 Cs that we learned from Japan, the 3 danger spots: closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. If everyone could memorize the 3 Cs, that would be so helpful. These are risky settings that are best avoided or minimized. I've spoken many times about the fact that we cannot continue to live in lockdown, nor do we want to live in a place where enforcement is our one defense. Our best defense is the Safe 6. Wash your hands, use sanitizer if soap and water are not available, remain 2 meters away from folks who are not in your family or in your bubble, stay home if sick. Don't gather in groups of more than 10 indoors, and, as of next week, 50 outdoors. Be respectful of community wishes when you travel, and self-isolate when required to. Don't cheat on the Safe 6. As we move forward, however, our part is to continue to develop the public health response and capacity that we need. South Korea packaged these as the 3 Ts: testing, tracing, and trust. Our part is ensuring that our testing capacity continues to be robust. As we develop new testing criteria and places to get tested, I will keep you updated. It is our job, as we expand entry to Yukon, that we stay ahead of cases with generous testing criteria and capacity. Similarly, we have the ability and resources to contact trace, with backup plans in preparation should we need extra capacity. Our part also is to continue to work on the trust that we need, that you can trust our approach, that you can trust each other to do the right thing, that you can trust that incoming travelers have the right information that they need to be safe as they travel within or through Yukon. We need to believe that the person in the grocery store has washed their hands, that the individual handing you your package at the post office is following the Safe 6, that your colleagues at work will stay home when sick. And if you live in a community outside Whitehorse, you need to feel confident that the visitors in your community are doing all the right things that will keep you and your family safe. We have a collective responsibility to ourselves, to our families, and to our community as a whole. I have trust in our public health system and workforce that they can help defend us and support us when we need it. And if we continue to do our part to keep the burden of COVID contained, I have trust in our acute care system, as we have worked so closely with them all along. As we move toward Phase 2 beginning next week, we are also planning for Phase 3 reopenings. And just as we have required public health triggers before advising that we could move to Phase 2, will require additional triggers before advising the government when it is safe or prudent to move to the next phase. The imposition of self-isolation remains our blanket coverage for now. And like our counterparts in BC, we are taking incremental steps forward to determine what we can do safely. Meantime, there should be no limit to the fun that we can have while staying safe. What we all need is to continue to enjoy our summer and to look forward to the months after that. For now, I know the campgrounds have been packed every weekend since opening. There's so much to do and see in our own territory. Despite borders easing on restrictions, this is the year of the staycation. Our local businesses will appreciate the support, and staying closer is staying safer. That's all for my update. Thank you. Merci. Merci, Joe.
Thank you, Premier Silver. Thank you, Dr. Hanley. We'll now go to the phone lines, and we'll start with Gabrielle, Whitehorse Star.
Hi. So BC residents will be required to provide ID at the border. Will residents of BC and Nunavut and NWT be asked any other questions? For instance, do they also need to share where they're going or how long they plan to stay in the Yukon?
Yeah, so there'll be a process where declarations will be made and proof of residency and following some questions. So the details of that will be worked out and we'll update you as we can. But yes, there will be a proof of residency need, ID that shows that you have a permanent address in Northwest Territories, Nunavut, or British Columbia, something like a driver's license.
Follow-up question, Gabrielle?
Right, and you mentioned the potential for opening borders to other jurisdictions on July 15th, which is only really 3 weeks away. Will things be open to jurisdictions one at a time or all at once, or what is that likely going to look like?
So again, more details to come on future steps, and also more details to come on Phase 3, which is a ways away still. But at this time, we're just. The work we have to do from now until the 15th is to work with our community partners and to make sure that all communities are ready for everything from when we open up campsites, moving forward through British Columbia and then into other jurisdictions in Canada. We need to make sure that our community partners are ready for these steps. So that's one of the 6 triggers for moving in between phases, and that's the good work that we have in front of us from now until the 15th. The good news is as we're moving forward, the situation in British Columbia and the situation in Canada is a cause for a cautious optimism and for us to be able to get to subsequent phases in a timely fashion.
Thank you. We'll move now to Chris, CBC.
Hi, thank you. We've heard several complaints about vehicles with U.S. license plates straying from the corridors that they're supposed to stick to. And given that several U.S. states have reopened and been rewarded with major spikes in coronavirus cases, and that the European Union is considering barring American travelers from its reopening, I guess, is there a threshold at which the government will say that American travelers are no longer permitted to transit through the territory given how poorly some states have handled the COVID-19?
Good question, Chris. It always does concern us, and it's a conversation at the First Minister's meetings with the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and the Premiers about the states and where they are. But for now, our provision is Alaskans traveling through are to travel directly through, and they have 24 hours. And we too, Chris, we've been hearing the same thing about seeing some vehicles at Walmart, at different places, with out-of-state plates. What we ask people to do is to not engage with travelers, but if you feel that somebody is not adhering to the provisions, the recommendations, and the requirements, then we do have phone numbers and email addresses to send that information into, and we do know from the weekly updates from the team over in community services, emergency measures folks, that for the most part, Alaskans on their way to Alaska are doing exactly that. They're sticking to the routes and they're making their way through, and it's been a lot of traffic that goes there. There will, in every case, be people that feel that they can circumvent the rules, and it's up to us, as Dr. Hanley said, to make sure that we do as much as we can do to up the enforcement, and that's definitely what we intend to do.
Follow-up, Chris?
I guess so. So is that a no? Then there's no situation in which. Sorry, excuse me. There's no situation in which the Yukon would, I guess, ask that the federal government stop allowing American travelers to transit through the territory.
Yeah, so again, it would be a situation where we are monitoring the numbers in Alaska. We're monitoring the numbers of all the states, and that conversation does happen at the federal level. And what we do is we add in to that conversation the conversations we've had with Governor Dunleavy. We know that British Columbia, you can imagine their conversations at the Council of the Federation and at the First Minister's meetings, looking at the rates of the states that are directly below British Columbia. That information is added to the conversation. Alberta has their own opinion. It seems that every jurisdiction is feeding in the statistical information that's relevant for the federal government to make a decision when it comes to international borders. But that conversation, you can imagine, is a weekly conversation. It's being monitored, and again, the federal government will maintain the borders based upon that, and we will maintain our direct routes to Alaska and up the enforcement with the current situation monitoring to see if things get better or worse.
Thank you. We'll move to Gord, Yukon News.
Joining the meeting.
So does this mean that restaurants won't be able to open to full capacity during phase 2?
Sorry, can you elaborate on the question? What part of it are you asking?
Well, last week during the announcement, it was said restaurants could open to full capacity during phase 2, and now it's sounding like that's probably not going to be possible necessarily.
Yeah, so in the past, we limited restaurants to 50% capacity. That 50% capacity is now lifted. But at the same time, each of those restaurants has to adhere to their operational plans. And in those operational plans, you have to maintain social distancing. So if you have the ability to maintain social distancing and open up to 100% capacity, then you can do that. It's just that a lot of restaurants won't have that ability. They have closed-in spaces that won't allow them to, if their capacity is 60, we're saying you can get to 60 if you maintain the social distancing, the parameters inside of the guidelines and the operational plans. So that's why we're working with the city and working with businesses and restaurants to see what we can do to expand spaces, like using sidewalks, those types of things, to get these businesses to maximize their capacity while also maximizing their safe distancing practices.
Follow-up question. Oh, sorry, Dr. Hanley.
It's mostly going to be a little bit repetitive, but I just want to reiterate that this is all about spacing. We have, with a restaurant, you have a setting or a bar, but you have a setting where people are inside and they're gathering inside. So that automatically is a high risk. That is a high risk setting. So we're trying to allow for the maximum capacity for restaurants to be able to realize some potential for profitability, recognizing that this is very challenging, but at the same time sticking to that bottom line, which is we have to have restaurants and businesses adhere to the fundamental concept of safe spacing. So it's not always going to be possible for a particular restaurant to get to 100% capacity and adhere to the safe spacing, but in some cases it will be possible. It depends on the configuration and obviously the overall space.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Gord?
For the proof of residency for residents from Nunavut, NWT, and BC, what would be acceptable other than a driver's license?
Yeah, so we're still working out those details. We're going through all the different types of proof, things like a statement of a utility, those sorts of things. So we're going through the list as one would to determine what would be the best approaches. Right now, for sure, license plates, but the substantive list, we'll have more details about that as we get closer to the date.
Thank you. We'll move now to Claudienne, Radio-Canada.
Hi, yes. First question for the Premier. So the border opens up, but yet there hasn't been much marketing or publicity made to attract residents from BC. It's been a complaint. We see on even the government website that it is not specifically said that residents of BC will be coming in on the 1st of July in the regular guidelines, not the press releases. So did the government get into pushbacks? Was there some concerns that was shared with the government that perhaps led to not making more publicity than we have to?
No. Tourism and Culture has been extremely active in developing a campaign directed specifically to market to British Columbia, for example. That work was done in earnest, knowing that we're following the epidemiology. And when we started to hedge and to say that we are looking to open up on July 1st, I think Minister Dendies and her team did a fantastic job of engaging with the stakeholders and presenting a plan. We've heard from the stakeholders that the plan is great. It's a matter of getting it out, and the good news is it will be launched today.
Prochaine question, Claudienne?
Oui, pour le docteur Hanley, c'est possible de m'expliquer en français, donc, quelles seront les règles pour les résidents d'autres provinces, d'autres territoires pour entrer au Yukon? Qu'est-ce qu'ils devront montrer? Si quelqu'un est malade, par exemple, si quelqu'un ne se sent pas bien, est-ce qu'on les retourne chez eux? Et juste me spécifier aussi pour les territoires. Donc, les territoires sont bienvenus au Yukon, mais je présume là, qu'on parle de quelque chose qui n'est pas réciproque, c'est ça? Donc, c'est pas une bulle qui va dans les deux sens.
So the question is for Dr. Hanley. Can you please repeat in French what conditions will people coming from BC, NWT, or Nunavut have to demonstrate to be allowed in the territory?
Non, merci. Les détails seront publiés plus tard, mais essentiellement, c'est juste pour connaître les règles du Yukon. Si quelqu'un, par exemple, a des symptômes ou pendant le séjour au Yukon, c'est pour savoir où aller pour avoir un test pour COVID ou pour avoir un examen si c'est nécessaire, et pour éviter un contact avec les autres, pour observer toutes les mesures de santé publique, toutes les mesures de Sécure 6, donc et pour être prudent avec le voyage dans les communautés rurales. Donc c'est pour respecter les règles qu'on a en place et pour savoir qu'ils ont un privilège spécial pour avoir cette visite. Donc c'est pour respecter toutes les mesures qu'on a en place.
Merci, Claudienne. We'll move now to Walter, CBC North.
Sorry, yeah, I can pass on my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Julien Roboréal?
Oui, ma question est pour le docteur Hanley. Je me demandais en fait, c'est quoi vos pronostics en fait sur le COVID, la situation avec l'ouverture des frontières concernant l'été? Est-ce qu'on va voir une augmentation? Est-ce que ça va être stable? Est-ce qu'il y aura une diminution? J'aimerais savoir votre avis à ce sujet. Merci.
So the question is for Dr. Hanley. What is your vision of how COVID-19 will evolve in the Yukon, given that we're opening the borders?
C'est la question de dollars millions. C'est toujours difficile. Bien sûr, mais c'est la réalité, c'est que on ne sait pas les prochaines étapes ou les prochains stages de COVID. On sait que à ce moment-là, c'est bien contrôlé pour la plupart du Canada. Donc on a de la confiance que on peut vivre avec COVID pendant que c'est stable dans ces situations. On sait aussi que c'est bien possible qu'on peut avoir des vagues et peut-être plusieurs vagues. Et donc mais avec toutes les mesures qu'on a en place pour protéger les sites vulnérables et pour avoir la capacité de santé publique qu'on a. Et si on suit toutes les mesures, on peut tolérer cette situation même avec une deuxième vague ou troisième vague de COVID dans le pays. Donc, mon but, c'est pour aller assez doucement que, avec les mesures, qu'on peut tolérer les COVID même avec les vagues qui viennent. C'est toujours possible qu'on va témoigner les éclosions, peut-être les grandes éclosions, et que on va arriver à un moment qu'il faut reculer avec les mesures. Mais j'espère que si on va assez lentement et avec prudence et avec toutes les protections qu'on va survivre effectivement les prochaines vagues de COVID et continuer d'apprendre comment vivre avec COVID. Shall I?
Yes, please.
Okay. To answer the question in English, it was really what do I anticipate for COVID in Yukon with the border reopening? And I'm saying that I'm hoping that my goal is that we're going slowly enough, and by putting in all the protections that we have and making sure that we maintain our capacity, the capacities that I've talked about, our public health capacity, our testing capacity, and the observance of the measures, whether in the workplace or in the public, around restrictions on gatherings and following the Safe Six. If we have all that in place, we should be able to stay in a position where we can stay ahead of COVID, even with subsequent waves of COVID that might come back to Canada. So if we do this well, we can tolerate COVID coming into Yukon, even if we're seeing large numbers of cases happen again in Canada. It is possible, though, that it will be to the amount, if we see large outbreaks, that we'll have to step back and either hold where we are or even go back. So that this is all part of the strategy that we're trying to put in place to learn how to live long term with COVID.
Avez-vous une autre question, Julien?
Non, pas d'autres questions. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. We'll move to Jane, CBC.
Hi, this is a question for Dr. Hanley, but Mr. Premier, you might have something to add to it as well. But Dr. Hanley, you mentioned, you've heard reports of crowded bars and restaurants, and campgrounds are packed every weekend, but also that we're moving away from enforcement and people just looking after their own actions. But there's only been 3 charges under SEMA. So do you think people are floating the rules and going to bars and restaurants and, ignoring your measures because there's no enforcement in the first place?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I do have my own views on enforcement, and what I was referring to with enforcement was making sure that we enforce settings, congregate settings, such where needed, such as restaurants and bars, so that if there are infractions on the requirements that we have put in place, that those are enforced by inspection, whether it's liquor inspection or environmental health. So those are measures that we need to use. I mean, I'm not surprised that in some bars, as they were just opening, that there was probably a bit of a rush and a bit of just organizing. That's normal. So it's not to sort of rush in and shut them down right away, but just to note that these, as I mentioned for a previous question, we do have to recognize that any indoor setting with people inside is a high-risk setting, and whether that's a workplace, whether it's a dinner party, whether it's a bar or a restaurant, or a faith gathering or a funeral, these are all situations where we can see COVID transmitting. We can see one person bring it in and a whole bunch of people affected, and people can get seriously ill from that. That's where I think we have to be so vigilant, and it's not the people transiting through that I get worried about. It's these, making sure that we're not setting ourselves up for an outbreak by not adhering to these measures, especially in indoor gathering situations. So that's where I see the need for enforcement. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not so worried about individuals, and I think that I think that we will recognize there will always be individuals that don't comply, but if we have the majority complying, it'll keep us out of trouble, and that's why I think at the borders we need to keep moving away from enforcement, from something that's not sustainable, that I don't think is necessary. If we can continue to build trust, make sure that people have the information that they need. We know that the majority of people really want to do the right thing. Nobody's interested in bringing COVID into the territory or spreading it around.
Premier Silver?
I'll just add to that. It absolutely is so essential right now as we move to restart to new normalcy, that individuals must follow the recommendations, and it's up to each and every one of us to continue the good practices. And you know, so far it has been working. There's a reason why there's only been 11 cases in Yukon. It's because of Yukoners. You know, it's because of the actions of individuals. It's also now the actions of businesses as well. You know, I don't just only have my own anecdotal information. I get calls from business communities all across Yukon, from individuals all across Yukon, and really, for the most part, businesses have been wonderful. They've been following the guidelines and the operational plans. It's very stressful for them, and you know, you're trying to figure out and make sure that you're back in business and doing that the most effective way. But I see a lot of Yukon businesses really caring about the health and welfare of Yukoners, and I can't thank them enough. That's why we are where we are right now. However, now that we're moving to, you know, opening up our borders, we've had this conversation for a couple of weeks now. We need to up our game when it comes to enforcement. So if there are a few bad actors out there, we will be upping those enforcement opportunities, and it is something that does concern us as well as we move through the phases. But again, I can't say it enough. Both British Columbia and Yukon is in the position we're in because we're following medical advice, the public health advice, and because of the citizens taking this seriously. So again, Yukoners, thank you very much. I know this is hard.
Thank you. Jane, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. Looking at the path forward plan, under phase 2, we're still under double bubble. You've talked a lot about a lot of other things that are reopening in phase 2, pools, and now our travel bubble with the NWT and Nunavut. But we still have just a double bubble with another household, where Nova Scotia last week and Ontario have gotten rid of that household bubble and you can keep it to just 10 people in your social circle, and Ontario is limiting it to this social circle of 10 people. Why are we staying in a double bubble in phase 2, or do you have plans to use that as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I guess I would say that we're always learning from what other jurisdictions are doing. I mean, everyone is innovating. We've I think made our own innovations, and we're also watching everyone else. I'm also cautious about doing too many things at once, because then it's hard to know, where you might be exposing yourself to more risk. So I think I think it's definitely something that we will be considering for phase 3. I think we've probably got enough of a package for phase 2 that I would be happy to stay where we are. We're expanding outdoor gatherings, which is a kind of a big deal, and of course along with the other measures and along with the BC, the border opening. So. Definitely under consideration, especially as not only other jurisdictions come up with these ideas. That we did borrow the double bubble household from it was New Zealand and then New Brunswick. So we're continually looking and borrowing and looking at not only what's tried but what appears to be working. So we'll definitely be incorporating that experience for future phases.
Thank you. We'll move to Tim, CKRW.
Good afternoon. I'm just not sure who can answer this question, but can you just clarify a Nunavut resident who wants to come in, they have to stop like 2, maybe 3 places. Can you just clarify how you plan on, making sure that they're okay?
Making sure that they travel within inside of the jurisdictions that are allowed to be here without self-isolation. Is that what you mean, Tim?
Yeah, well, just in general. Because they'll probably have to fly through Ottawa, Vancouver, then here, type of thing. Yeah, so they wouldn't be allowed. You can't go down to Ontario on your travels through. It's the same thing if somebody left Prince George in a car. Being able to go into Alberta is not part of the considerations on your travel up. So we do recognize that there are no direct flights from Nunavut to Yukon, but again, if somebody is traveling from a charter type of thing, if there was an airline route, that's kind of how it would have to be for Nunavut right now. We do recognize that Air North as well going into Ontario, they don't go into Ontario right now, so there's not that flight that goes between Yellowknife and Whitehorse either. What we're doing is we're saying that we are open to people if they have the ability of traveling in the districts where there is no self-isolation risk, and if you can get here from those, you're welcome to come in without self-isolation. If you are traveling from those regions and you have to get out of those regions into other areas of Canada, then you would have to do your 14-day self-isolation.
Quickly, we know that there are many people, especially our more immediate neighbours in Northwest Territories in the Beaufort and Delta, Inuvik, Mackenzie region, that really where the drive for this was coming, because we know that they like to come into down through the Dempster and to Whitehorse. And whether it's for family or friends or for shopping, so that's where some of the demand, probably the most. There's also a symbolic value to do this, to be open to our northern colleagues, and as well, NWT and Nunavut, of course, are already in a bubble. So we wouldn't open up to Northwest Territories without opening up to Nunavut, even if it's largely a symbolic gesture.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Tim?
This question is for the Premier. With the bubble with BC and campgrounds, will you give any consideration to allowing BC residents and Yukon campgrounds? I know in looking at the BC website, they are also saying like BC residents only, and I know it's Yukon residents only in Yukon campgrounds right now. Will there be any consideration to allowing BC residents and Yukon campgrounds?
Yes. Residents of British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut are welcome to use the government-run parks and campgrounds as of July 1st, obviously. And we are asking that anyone, Yukoners or others who are welcome, that they travel respectfully and follow the posted instructions of the community in which they're visiting and, of course, the campsite that they're in.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier Silver. Thank you, Dr. Hanley. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. A reminder that our next COVID-19 update will be Tuesday, June 30th at 2 p.m. to accommodate for the Canada Day holiday. Thank you.